Thank you for joining us for Sermons on Demand from Friendship Grace Brethren Church. We provide these videos as a way to share the pulpit messages and teachings offered at Friendship Grace Brethren Church. If you find these videos a helpful resource, please drop us a note at info@friendshipgracebrethren.com. Now open your Bibles and get ready to dig into the Word of God. I know I've said I don't like Job, but we've still got a little bit of Job to look at, and some questions that I want to address from the book of Job. So we're looking at week 3 of our readings, and my first question this evening is, what is behemoth in Job 40:15 and multiple other places?
Behemoth is something very big.
Something very big.
Possibly an ancestor of an elephant or a bison. Taking joy.
An ancestor of an elephant or a bison. Okay. I'm going to prove you wrong in that, just so you know.
Okay. That's good. Okay with me.
Anybody?
A dinosaur.
A dinosaur. Yeah, I think Sybil is more correct than any of the others, although the statement that it's big and so forth is fitting.
Britannica Encyclopedia Britannica defines it as a large, powerful, grass-eating animal, and somewhere it's noted that people used to say it was a hippo, but hippos and rhinoceros don't have large, powerful tails, so that would rule those two animals out.
Exactly.
I think the dinosaur is closer.
In English translations of the Hebrew word, which is behemoth, we have hippopotamus, we have crocodile, we have elephant. What kind of tail does an elephant have?
Skinny thing, not very much.
Yeah. What kind of tail does a hippopotamus have?
A little runny thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and crocodiles, to my knowledge, don't eat grass. Okay. So we have several references to behemoth in Scripture. The problem is the word is a generic word that doesn't necessarily speak of the same animal every time. It would be like saying livestock. In many ways, it's used in the Old Testament, such as in Job 40:15. Behold, behemoth, which I made you, eats grass like an ox. That's the first reference, but we have several others. Genesis 6:20. Of the birds according to their kinds, of the animals according to their kinds, of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind, 2 of every sort shall come to you to keep them alive. Of the animals according to their kinds, that's the word behemoth. So that causes us some difficulty in understanding necessarily. How about Genesis 34:23? Will not their livestock, behemoth, their property and all the beasts, behemoth, be ours? Only let us agree with them, and they will dwell with us. Or Numbers 36:26. Our little ones, our wives, our livestock. Again, behemoth. So you see that the word is not a specific animal reference. It is a type of animal, big, 4-legged, typically. So when we read it in Job 40, we have to look at what's being said to get a better idea of what kind of animal we're talking about. So look at Job 40, verses 15 through 18. Behold, behemoth, which I made, as I made you. He eats grass like an ox. Behold, his strength is in his loins, and his power in the muscles of his belly. And he makes his tail stiff like cedar. The sinews of his thigh are knit together. His bones are tubes of bronze, and his limbs like bars of iron. That's not a cow. It's not even a bull. It's not a hippopotamus. This is describing what we see very often in the descriptions of dinosaurs or of dragons. Now, dinosaur is a new name, a new word. It only came about in the 19th century. There was no description before the 19th century of dinosaurs. So when I say dinosaur, you could also use the word dragon, which I find fascinating that every culture in history has conversations and narrative and myth about dragons. How does everybody describe the same kind of creature? They describe the same kind of creature because they saw it.
I was just going to say that I put in Mark about dragons in here from Job 40 verse 19. No, 41 verse 19.
Right. Probably that would in 41. That's in reference to Leviathan, but that might be the same. Might be the same thing.
Why does it have to be a reptile? Why couldn't it be a mammal that was long ago?
It could be. It could be. And as we study the dinosaurs, we know they're not all reptilian. Or let me not use the word dinosaur, because that has certain connotations about hip structure and so forth that we don't necessarily need to add to this. It could be a large animal with a large tail, strong, stands up tall, with lots of force, bigger than we know, that is now extinct.
We know there were large mammals that are now extinct, i.e., woolly mammoths and things like that. So
right, but the woolly mammoth won't fit because it's more like an elephant, which has that dinky little tail and that strong face and so forth. So what animal it is, we don't know. We just know that it's an animal and not a myth because it's mentioned so many times in Scripture as being a real creature. So Job particularly here, or God to Job, is describing this great big dragon, dinosaur, mammal kind of large creature.
But why does it say in the next verse, in verse 19, he is the first of the works of God? That's the verse that puzzled me.
In 40:19?
Yes. We're talking about behemoth, and then the very next verse says he is the first of the works of God.
Let me get to that verse and look at it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a new paragraph, but let's see.
But it seems to still be talking about the behemoth.
Yeah, it does. And here's how I would argue that the animals were created on the same day as man, and the word first here can be a reference to order, or order in time, order of importance, or order of power. So what some scholars have argued is that here God is saying he's the greatest of my created animals. In other words, say this is like a dinosaur, the greatest, what's the greatest dinosaur, the Tyrannosaurus Rex or what, the Triceratops or any of those, the greatest, the most powerful, the one that's at the apex predator at the top of the chain. That could be what he's talking about here.
Okay. That just puzzled me. He's the first of the works of God.
Yeah, just understand first there can mean not just first in order of time.
Got it.
Yeah, in fact, it is translated various ways as beginning, first fruits, first, or chief. So if you use the translation of chief, or the concept of chief, that gives you the idea it's the most powerful, it's the strongest, whatever. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Steve wants to know if Job was written before or after the flood.
It was written after the flood, probably within 200 or 300 years of the flood. Well, I shouldn't say that. Now, let me rephrase. The events pictured in the book of Job occurred then. When it was written, I think probably during the exile, and not during that time. We don't know who wrote it, but it depicts what occurred 200 or 300 years after the flood.
Weren't the dinosaurs and those big animals killed in the flood?
Wasn't the dinosaurs killed in the flood?
Well, we assume so, but we don't know if they weren't carried on the ark.
It could have been baby.
Yeah, they could have been baby dinosaurs. We don't know. We have a very limited fossil record that would give us an indication of dinosaurs after the flood. A lot of people question, well, why aren't there dinosaur and human fossils at the same time? First of all, there are some that claim that we have some. Those fossils have not necessarily been truly validated. But we have lots of petroglyphs. Those are drawings and carvings on the walls of caves and so forth with dinosaurs and man. So we know they coexisted. The reason we don't have many fossils is we have very few human fossils. I mean, very, very few human fossils. Let's take a thought of what happened at the flood. You know, as the water started to come up, what did people not on the ark do?
Drown.
Well, they didn't just sit there and take it.
They tried to go to higher ground.
They tried to go to higher ground. They tried to build rafts and all that kind of stuff. They did whatever they could, right, to stay alive. So the fossil has to be something that is impacted immediately. It can't be something that sat there for years in the mud or in the dirt, because you know what happens to dirt. It blows away. So that can't be. It has to be something that was immediate impact. And where were all the people? They were floating. And so we have very, very little fossil record of humans. And so it's not unusual or not difficult to understand why we don't have many fossils of humans and dinosaurs. I think we have post-flood dinosaur markings and tracks and indications. So I think there were some dinosaurs post-flood. Did most of the very large ones die? Probably. But we just don't know what animals, what kinds were on the ark.
Well, and humans and animals turned into oil. That's why we have oil.
Well, it's not the only reason. It's not the only reason we have oil. That was a common belief that oil is not a regenerative commodity. But I think it's Dr. Andrew Snelling. I think it's Snelling. He did his PhD thesis at, I forget what university, where he actually created oil in the lab from pond scum. And I'm not talking about creating, what they do in the labs around here to make this green ooze stuff. I'm talking about he made like oil that you put in your car. He proved that it's a recurring process that doesn't take millions and billions of years. In fact, oil can be created relatively quickly, just like a diamond can. A diamond is not something that requires millions of years and pressure and heat. It just requires pressure and heat and can be done. I think the shortest span of a diamond being created is now 35 minutes. That blows evolutionists away. Because diamonds used... Say it again.
There are companies that now take ashes and turn them into diamonds of loved ones and things like that.
Right. And so that just is another nail in the coffin of the evolutionary chain. Because they used to teach it takes millions and billions of years to create a diamond. Well, now we can do it in 35 minutes. Thank you very much.
Never heard about the oil thing though. That's pretty cool.
No.
Yeah, I think it's Andrew Snelling. I'll have to look that up. I forget which one it is. He's a Christian PhD creationist, and his PhD dissertation was all about the oil bogs, how to create oil out of bogs, and that kind of stuff. And it has been peer reviewed and proven he's correct, which then causes all sorts of problems for our timeline. One other thing that I should point out about Job 40:15, behemoth there is in the plural. It's talking about a singular animal, but it's in the plural. It's not always in the plural all throughout these other verses, but in this case it is, which leads Hebrew scholars to say that it is the plural of majesty or of dynamics of being really, really big. So you talk about it as multiple things. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So a lot of people have argued that Behemoth and Leviathan, which I'll ask that question in a little bit, are mythical creatures, that they're not really real. There's nothing in the text that leads you to believe God is telling a story, that would lead you to believe that God is saying, I'm telling you a story about a mythical creature. He gives no indication of that. God speaking the truth about Behemoth, that there was a creature described as Job 40 describes it, and that he coexisted at the same time as man.
I don't understand why people find that so difficult to believe. Originally, man lived for so much longer because sin hadn't had its effect yet on people. I don't find it difficult to believe that the animals were larger either, because sin had not had its effect on the animals. It doesn't bother me that the animal might have been so much bigger than what we have today.
Yeah. It bothers a lot of people because they don't want it to be proof of God. And they don't want God to be telling the truth. So there are many accounts of dragons, dinosaurs, large kinds of animals around. There are even some stories, some indications that we have some dinosaur human fossils at the same time. And again, I would never use those in an argument because no one has properly scientifically authenticated those as being real. But there are a number of, I'll call anecdotal stories, and I'll just reference one. On April 26, 1890, the Tombstone Epitaph, a newspaper in Tombstone where the OK Corral was, they included a story, and I've read the story in their newspaper, of a pterodactyl type flying creature being found outside of town. There are legends that go along with this, that several cowboys shot it down and this kind of stuff. That stuff can't be substantiated. There are pictures floating around. Those can't be substantiated. But the description in the newspaper is it's 60, 70 feet long, 180 foot wingspan, that kind of thing. And what they describe is like a pterodactyl, a dinosaur bird. And it has been reviewed and looked at, and as far as the turn of the century from 1800s to 1900s, investigations that occurred about whether or not the story was legitimate or was a myth, and it's always come up as being legitimate.
Interesting.
It's a fascinating story, but it's just part of the evidence of until the 1900s. It wasn't hard to believe that there were dragons and there were dinosaurs coexisting with man. It was around the turn of the century, 1800s to 1900s, that those kinds of things began to be called myths. Another example, the dodo bird. Dodo bird is a real creature or not?
Yes.
Real creature.
Real creature.
It's a real creature. Yeah.
Except if you look in modern encyclopedias and modern biological works and so forth. In
No.
in the late 1800s, early 1900s, dodo birds were on display in many museums where they actually had the dodo bird. By 1920s, because Darwinian evolution was really thank you for the dodo bird. Darwinian evolution was really taking a hold. They started to say dodo birds were mythological. They weren't real. Until museums went to their back room and pulled out the old exhibits of real dodo birds. The reason I bring that up is we are being told one thing by so-called science and the modern world, that these things are not true, and we have many proofs that they don't always tell us the truth. So when somebody says there were no such thing as dragons, or there were no such thing as dinosaurs coexisting with man, we have too many anecdotal. I'll admit they're anecdotal stories. All the petroglyphs and petroglyphs and all that document that say they are coexisting.
So would it not be absolutely wonderful if the Loch Ness Monster finally decided to show itself?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And he will someday.
Awesome.
He will someday.
I'm sure.
And the last thing
would know about dinosaurs.
I'll say is, I believe that there actually were fire-breathing dragons.
Mm-hmm.
Biology is beginning to say it's now possible. There is a beetle that spits fire out its butt for
I know.
200 feet.
Yep.
A little beetle. If a beetle can do, that's a heck of a fart. If a beetle can do that, I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. If a beetle can do that, why would we assume that dinosaurs/dragons couldn't? Biology is beginning to come around to this because the proof is beginning to be seen.
Don't feed the animals some chili.
Well, let me tell you, one day last week, we had chili for dinner. I had huevos rancheros for breakfast, and then Linda gave me chili dogs for lunch.
Oh my!
I was about to prove it myself.
You should come for lunch. That sounds good.
They were good. Okay. I'm not going to spend as much time on Leviathan, but it is the same kind of story, right?
Yes.
The world says Leviathan is not real. Loch Ness Monster is not real. I want to go swimming in the Loch Ness just because I want to find Nessie.
You can.
I'm sorry?
They themselves, they go through a whole spiel, and at the end, they disprove that it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I'm sure Nessie isn't there, but it would be really awesome if she was.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
There need to be two Nessies to even procreate.
Correct.
guys.
Correct.
Well, not
But like
necessarily.
that,
There are
they
some animals that
themselves
don't need
disprove it.
that
Right.
don't need help procreating. So
Right.
okay, let's look at Job 41:1. Can you draw a Leviathan with a fishhook, or press down his tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in his nose, or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many pleas with you? Will he speak to you in soft words? Will he make a covenant with you to take him for your servant forever? Will you play with him as with a bird, or will you put him on a leash for young girls? Will traders bargain over him? Will they divide him up among the merchants? Can you fill his skin with harpoons, or his head with fishing spears? Lay your hands on him, remember the battle, you will not do it again. In other words, this is going to be a heck of a fight.
Do you think that means in there that by the time that Job was written, that there was already people who had pets? It just struck me as really unusual that they said on a leash.
Sure.
And yet they say that animals weren't domesticated for pets until in the 1800s.
I don't think that's true.
I questioned it all along, but that just struck me when I was reading it this time.
Clearly here in Job 41, God is presenting Leviathan as a real animal.
Yeah.
But Job is not the only place we read about Leviathan.
Oh, no.
The author of Psalm 74. You crushed the heads of Leviathan, and here's what you did with him. You gave him as food to creatures in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Clearly, the Bible's telling us that Leviathan is a real creature. What kind of creature is he? Clearly a sea creature, or an amphibian of some sort. Here's what we don't know. Well, I can't tell you what we don't know because we don't know what we don't know. Here's what I do know about what we don't know. Is there so much we don't know? Last summer, this is 2022, so in 2020, 2 summers ago, a previously unknown type of squid was found. Generally not seen, once it was identified, not seen by anybody in the water because it's usually incredibly deep. But this particular squid was seen in an area where there had been some upheaval, kind of like the volcano out by Tonga, and had been pushed to the surface. Here's a previously unknown sea creature. Who do we think we are that we think we've seen them all? So I believe...
I could go for animals that are on land as well as for underwater.
Right, absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, there are animals we have no idea what they are, that have never been seen by us. You know, all these stories about the Everglades skunk ape, the Sasquatch, Bigfoot. Are those real? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. It's possible out there that we don't know. The only guy that's ever seen every kind of animal is Adam.
And I do not believe he has seen every animal that we have today.
Correct. He's seen every kind, not every species. And that's a big difference. Kind and species are not the same thing.
And Noah would be another one.
Well, maybe.
Each to his own kind.
Right.
What was left?
Right. We don't know that there were not animals that were taken out between the fall and the flood.
True.
So I agree, Chuck. Probably Noah had a much better taxonomy handle than we do, but we don't know for sure. Adam for sure, because we're told he got to see them all.
Well, he named them all.
He named them all.
How could Adam name every single bug? Oh my gosh.
Well, because he didn't
could
have the
use
con-
100% of his brain.
right.
We are lucky if we use 10%.
Well, I know a lot of people that don't use 2%.
Why did he swat the mosquitoes?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question.
Because they play a vital role in our ecosystem.
Thank
Oh,
you.
they weren't bad before the fall.
Okay, let's go on. That's enough about those things. Let's go on to Genesis. One of my favorite characters in the book of Genesis, because it's just a fun name to say. Who is Melchizedek?
Melchizedek, oh my goodness.
Melchizedek is a priest, a kingly priest or a priestly king.
Right, a high priest.
A high priest of.
The city of Jerusalem.
He's a high priest of the Most High God and king of Salem, which would become Jerusalem. Correct.
Yeah.
El Elyon.
There's all sorts of mystery about Melchizedek. We don't necessarily know where he came from. We're told that he didn't have a mother and father, or at least we don't know of a mother and father. Some conservative scholars would argue that Melchizedek is a theophany or Christophany. Others would argue that he was a mortal man that was just an archetype of Jesus. There's all sorts of things that surround Melchizedek. Let's look at some of the passages. Genesis 18, starting in verse 18. Starting in verse 18. Seeing that Abraham shall surely become great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him, for I have chosen him. Why did I put that there?
I think you want chapter 14.
I do want chapter 14.
17.
I do want chapter 14. So let me just fix that here real quick. That's what happens when you have fat fingers. Okay. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High, and he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abraham by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And be blessed by God Most High, who had delivered your enemies into your hand. And Abraham gave him 1/10 of everything. What's that mean? Why did Abraham tithe to Melchizedek?
He was, well, when the Jews tithe in the temple and the tabernacle, they're giving the 10th of what they have, their net worth, back to God.
Okay.
So he's doing the same thing.
Why would he do it to Melchizedek?
Because he thinks because he's a representative of God, like
Okay.
the high priest was later on.
Okay.
Because Abraham recognized that Melchizedek worshipped the same God that he did.
I would argue it's both of you are correct, but I would argue it's more than that. He recognized Melchizedek as superior to him because he was in fact a high priest of the Most High God.
Yeah, Jesus is a high priest.
Yeah, Jesus is a high priest after the order of Melchizedek, not after the order of Aaron. Which introduces all sorts of of neat stuff for us, and we'll get to that in just a moment here as we look at some of the passages that talk about Melchizedek. Psalm 110:4. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. A messianic prophecy about the Messiah. Hebrews chapter 5 verses 6 through 11. And he says also in another place, you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek, quoting Psalms. In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverence. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. And being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey, being designed or designated by God a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. About this we have much to say. It is hard to explain, since you have become dull of hearing. I could have stopped in verse 10, I guess. So, what's that tell us about Melchizedek in the Old Testament, and then the application of Melchizedek in Hebrews?
Because he's comparing it, Melchizedek to Jesus, was Melchizedek actually a Christophany?
Many people think he was. The descriptor of Melchizedek not having father or mother may mean that we just don't know who his mom and dad were, or that he was not there before and then appeared, and which would describe a Christophany or a theophany. And I don't believe there were theophanies. I think only Jesus came.
I wrote in beside that God makes sure to communicate that, and because he does, that there were people who served him and obeyed him long before the Mosaic law came to establish the priesthood.
Right. Yeah, Melchizedek is not after the order of Aaron, because he precedes Aaron by several hundred years, 400, 500 years.
But the fact that he was a priest, but there was no law yet given, but yet he understood who God was and could function as a priest, indicates that God was speaking to the people who had ears to hear and wanted to follow and obey.
Correct.
And to me, that's why he was special, and why Abraham gave a tenth to him, because he recognized about Melchizedek.
Once the law was given and the Aaronic priesthood was begun, it would always be a Levite. It would always be a descendant of Abraham, always a descendant of Aaron. That would be the priest. So then, when God comes along and establishes a covenant with David, not from the tribe of Levi, not a descendant of not a descendant of Levi, but now a descendant of Judah, we have a completely different line that can't now be brought together in an Aaronic priest.
Mm-hmm.
That's always been interesting to me, that God established the Aaronic priesthood like he did, but he chose to have Messiah, who would be the priest king, come from the tribe of Judah. So he had previously established, before he established the law and the Aaronic priesthood, he established Melchizedek as a priest of the Most High God. And Jesus was a priest king after his order.
And would it make the case against Melchizedek being a Christophany when Hebrews says you're a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek? I mean, if it was the same person, why would they say that?
I don't think it necessarily makes it such that Melchizedek couldn't be a Christophany.
Okay.
Because
It doesn't, well,
It seems like a statement for Jesus, for the Messiah to be recognized as a priest and a king, which a priest was very important for us that were not part of the Jewish family, because we didn't have a priest otherwise.
yeah.
So the idea of priest and bringing priest and king
Yeah.
together was something that couldn't exist in an Aaronic priest if the king was going to come from the line of David. So it had to be a different kind of priest. And I see what you're saying about why would it be said that way. But if Jesus is Melchizedek as a Christophany, then I don't think doesn't negate Jesus, or doesn't negate. Well, I just talked myself into a circle there. I think what you said, it could be, but doesn't have to be.
Okay,
How about that?
okay.
What else do I want
I
to talk?
don't think Christophany though, because everywhere where we see Christ, a Christophany, Abraham bows down and worships, and he doesn't bow down and worship Melchizedek.
That's correct. The difference might be that he might not have known it was the Lord.
Why would he not know this time and he knew all the other times?
Got nothing. I don't know. I have vacillated for years. I've read 3 or 4 books, read all sorts of journal articles on Melchizedek, and I'm still not certain of what I understand and what I believe. He was somebody that Abraham respected and looked at as superior to him. He gave him a tithe. And Abraham didn't do that with every king around. So it's something special. And we have a special declaration or statement about him in Hebrews that talks about him as being an archetype for Jesus. So there's something special about him. What it is, I haven't got to the bottom of that one yet.
I just find it fascinating altogether that we hear so little about how God communicates with the people he chooses from the beginning of the Bible through until the Mosaic covenant. It's just a snatch here, a snatch here, a snatch here. And yet we see that the principle of tithing is there, the principle of priesthood is there, the principle of sacrifice is there. So obviously God is communicating. We just haven't been told how he's doing it.
Yeah, and that began right along with Cain and Abel. I mean, they brought sacrifices. That was the whole problem for
So
Cain.
I just find that fascinating.
Yep. Okay, one final question. I know we're over a little bit, but I want to ask this question because I think it's important that we understand it.
I have a question after you're done.
Okay, go ahead before I ask my question because this might take too long. Okay, go ahead.
On Job 42, verse 11. It says, Then came to him all his brothers and sisters and all who had known him before, and ate bread with him in his house, and they showed him sympathy and comforted him for all the evil that the Lord had brought upon him.
Yep.
And each of them gave him a piece of money and a ring of gold. I think it's a poor translation in the ESV that the Lord brought upon him, but what do you say?
No, what's the definition of what's the definition of evil?
The opposite of good. The absence of good.
Okay, so evil is the absence of good. Having your kids gone, your wealth gone, everything gone except your nagging wife. Is that the opposite of good?
The other translation says disaster that was brought upon him.
Sure, yeah. The problem is we think of the word evil as being always sinful. And the way it's used in Scripture, it's not always that. What happened to King Saul? What kind of spirit did God send on King Saul? An evil spirit.
Yeah.
So obviously it can't be sinful. And God sending all of this calamity on Job, or commissioning Satan to send all this calamity on Job, can't be sinful because God did it. So the word evil doesn't denote sinful. That's the problem we have. We think evil, we think sinful. Evil is just, as you described it, the absence of good.
Okay.
From our perspective. From Job's perspective, his life was just about as bad as it gets. I mean, he could have been on hee-haw. Gloom, despair, and agony on me. So don't think evil as being sinful and the way we commonly use the word. The word is ra, and means wickedness, depravity, disaster, misfortune. That's how that word is translated. It's a problem of our modern English and what we think we know.
Okay.
Cool. Good question. Okay. Why did God count Abram as righteous?
Because he believed God would supply do something if he had to sacrifice Isaac.
Yeah, you can just say he believed God. So here's the guy that's the beginner, the patriarch of the Jewish nation that the majority of the Old Testament is written about. And the modern understanding of what they had to go through was they had to do things, they had to be good for God to save them. But here we're told in the 15th chapter of Genesis 15, chapter 15, verse 4, behold, the word of the Lord came to him, this man shall not be your heir, your very own son shall be your heir. And he brought him outside and said, look toward the heaven and number the stars, if you're able to number them. And he said to him, so shall your offspring be. And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. The Apostle Paul talks about it in Romans chapter 4, verse 3. For what does the scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. Paul says in Galatians 3:6, just as Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. Salvation has always been faith and trust in God. It has never been about what you do. It's never been about what church you go to, how much money you give. It's never been about any of that. It's not been about the sacrifices. It's not been about anything other than your faith in God. If we had time tonight, we could talk about where that faith comes from. You don't bring it, God gives it. It's part of his predestination and election process. But the truth is, it's always by faith. It's never by anything else. All the way back in Genesis 15, we see righteousness being given because of faith. Thank you for watching or listening to this teaching on demand from Friendship Grace Brethren Church. Please consider sending us an email at info@friendshipgracebrethren.com to let us know how this teaching may have helped you. Please also consider joining us in person at Friendship Grace Brethren Church, located at 10251 Metro Parkway, Suite 116, Fort Myers, Florida, just south of the intersection of Metro and Colonial Boulevard. Sunday school begins at 9 and worship service at 10 a.m. We look forward to seeing you in person at Friendship Grace Brethren Church.